Good evening and welcome to Getting to Know Your Neighbor's Faith, Ask Me Anything. And tonight we have Pastor Floyd Thompkins with us, who will be talking about African-American Christianity, or, well, however he wants to explain it. We'll see what happens. And it happens to be that he is here on Juneteenth. So we are very grateful for you being here. I know that this month is probably very busy for you. So thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
And before I introduce him officially, I will make a few announcements. The first is that if you like what we are doing here, you are welcome to make a donation on our website, or those of you in person can donate however you want. But on our website, there is a big donate button. You're welcome to use that. This is also one of our Wednesday evenings. Someone was just saying everything happens on Wednesdays. The first Wednesday of the month, we have a meditation with Annie Jorgensen, who is a Brahma Kumaris, and they're called Release into Peace. And it's just a short 15-minute meditation to kind of end your evening or begin your night, however you want to look at it. The second Wednesday of the month, we have our monthly meditation, which is from a different faith tradition every month. And next month we have the Reverend Lisa Winston. So she will be with us. And then next month for Getting to Know Your Neighbor's Faith, we have Dr. Erica Baines, who is from the Sikh faith tradition. So that will be another night of learning for me. When we are, after Pastor Floyd talks, we will then have time for questions. So anyone here in person, just raise your hand and I'll try and call on you. If you are joining us on Zoom, then just type a question to chat and Scott will read off your questions. So let me now introduce the Reverend Floyd Thompkins. Reverend Floyd Thompkins is a gifted leader, preacher, and teacher devoted to Christ and to creating a strong community. Concurrent to his role at St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church in Marin City, Reverend Thompkins serves as the CEO of the Justice and Peace Foundation, an organization continuing the tradition of building the beloved MLK community. He previously served as Vice President and Director of the Center for Innovation in Ministry of the San Francisco Theological Seminary. He was also the Associate Dean of Religious Life at two world-class institutions, Stanford and Princeton Universities. Reverend Thompkins has published 3 books and many academic papers and is frequently called upon to give his perspectives and opinions on race, healthcare, and spirituality. And with that, we are very grateful for your presence here tonight. So I will give you the floor to talk a little bit about your faith.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the Interfaith Council for letting me be here tonight and making the phone call. And anything Scott asks me to do, I try to do. And I really appreciate it. And the organization that you represent tonight is really important for Marin County and also for the good of the world. And so I'm deeply, deeply grateful to be here. I want you to know that African-American religion and spirituality is broad. So it's rather a large charge. And I've gotten a few memos saying, this is how you do this. So I'm going to try to go by the outline, and I'm going to do it in 15 minutes, which of course you could cover the entire spirituality in 15 minutes. So I'm going to try to do a little bit of biography and kind of locate myself, as well as a little history and some misconceptions that might happen. The first thing I have to say that everyone always thinks is that people think the African-American church, especially, there are 3 myths that we want to begin with. First myth is it is not because Black people want to come to get together and worship. That is not how the Black church was born. Every time it was born because basically white folks threw them out. So it's never had a history of exclusion. It's never been about cultural homogeneity. It became that way because when the exclusion practices happened, then obviously that's that, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The second thing that I think the myth that people have about African American church tradition is that it is different because of that exclusion forced upon it, right? And you'll see historically how we developed. It also has a theologically different thing. So it may look evangelical, but even when it's evangelical, it's not evangelical in the same way. And so it always used to drive me crazy when everyone says, well, the evangelical churches, and then they show this African-American church, and I would say, actually, that church didn't vote the way you think it voted. And it has nothing to do with and again, in a couple of minutes, I want to get into that. And I think the third myth that happens is that somehow that the church itself is exclusive. There is not an African-American church of any tradition that has ever had anything that says we only have Black folks. Again, refer back to the first one, because it was not established because it just wanted Black folks to be together. That having been said, a quick thing is I grew up in Florida, and I grew up in a religious household. My mother and father were a part of two different churches, and they both went to their own church. But they decided that the kids had to go to both churches. So we grew up going to a lot of church. We went to more church than they went to. I just want to say that, okay? So my father was missionary Baptist, and my mother was Pentecostal. And so we went back and forth into those churches. What's important and what's interesting about that historically is that the Baptist and Missionary Baptist Church is one of the oldest churches founded in the U.S. Black churches that are founded in the U.S. 17th century, absolutely. And then the Cogent Church of God in Christ, for which she was not Cogent, but came out of, that was actually one of the last African-American churches. So African-American churches are 7 major historical African-American churches. I'm going to get them. I always forget one. There's Baptist, there's National Baptist, there's African-American Episcopal Church, there's Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, there's AME Zion, and there is two, I'm forgetting. I'll remember them. These are churches that historically came to be, and they are the historical churches. In 1619, when the first slaves were brought to Jamestown, there is the myth that somehow then African-American spirituality began there. That is not true. That actually they were enslaved people, which means they had a culture and a way of being. And there are some hallmarks of the culture. And those hallmarks of the culture are sometimes what we lose in the context of when we study and think about what it means to be a Christian now. One of the biggest things that you'll see, one of the anthropologists as well as theologians always thought of, is that Africans in the continent didn't believe that you had to give up what you were believing when something new came. So you could hold two diametrically opposed beliefs and enjoy both of them, which of course in the Western mind is almost impossible, right? So some Muslims would think they've converted somebody and they'd be converted. And then Christians will come and think they were converted to somebody and they'd be converted. And they say, so which are you? And the answer would be yes. That is important to know of one of the hallmarks of African-American Christianity or spirituality, is that we hold all things to be sacred, and we listen closely to whatever that might mean in a particular tradition. And until the missionaries came, we did not make choices. Now, the other myth is that somehow Christianity is all a missionary phenomenon. The oldest church in the world is not a Catholic Church. It is not the Greek Orthodox Church. It is the Ethiopian Coptic Church. And it finds its history biblically in the 7th or 8th chapter of Acts. And what's important, real quickly, I'm going to preach on this in a couple of weeks in a church, is that while the churches from both the Protestant and Catholic is founded in Matthew, that, upon this rock I'll build my church, and it's Peter, who is a Jewish person who is then is fighting the hegemony of the Roman Empire. and who is fighting to be thrown over. That's not what happens in the beginning of the African American church. It is a trans person. It is a multiracial evangelist. And the person that has to accept the faith is a Black woman whose title is Candace, not name. So imagine how faith is different when you began a church in that way, within the actual depths of the multiculturalism, and that's the African faith tradition. So Christianity didn't come, but when they encountered Christianity on the core, after the phenomenon of slavery, there then was the first and second Great Awakening, and now I'm quickly moving, of which then what is interesting of that is the first Great Awakening, a few churches were born. The second Great Awakening is when a lot of churches were born. What's the difference? Well, the difference, the first Great Awakening, and I know you're Episcopal, is that we had some great Episcopal priests and we had church, and preaching was important, but it was not the definitive reality, right? The definitive reality happened during the second Great Awakening when those Methodists came through and the Baptists came through. And they preached not only the New Testament, but what we now call the Hebrew Scriptures, and they call the Old Testament. What's really important about that is, and I always say this, and somebody online is going to be in trouble and they'll be mad at me for this. I always say Jesus didn't convince, they were not too sure about Jesus. But when you talked about Jesus and Moses and Exodus, okay. So that was the difference. It's that alchemy of understanding that liberation was at the very core of Jesus. And so what's really important about that becomes important is that to understand that African American spirituality and churches are not just about, they're not convinced because of the salvation of the souls, which is kind of Greek, but actually the salvation of us on earth, meaning out of slavery, meaning exactly almost from the trans person that took the faith back to the Black woman and saying we can be free and change the way in which we move in this world, right? And so in the church, in African American churches, you see that. I saw that in the Baptist church tradition. The other thing is, it's only got 12 minutes, and I'm really moving quickly. The other hallmark that I wanted to stress tonight is I happened to be born and came into this, became a Christian at the time of a very important time in the Black church history, in which Black preachers especially were going to seminary. And so, because of Martin Luther King, right? And Martin Luther King was an anomaly, a seminary trained person, but he had to meet all the markers that you have to for a Black pastor to be a leader of the community, good with the word, and connecting to people. That basically has to be that. But he also, so he had to do all that, and then he did the academics. And in Boston University, he went to Boston University, and he was still an evangelical. Boston personalism is why he went there. He didn't go there to study. He went there to study Boston personalism, which was salvation and how it integrated into the world. He then eventually encountered through Howard Thurman and other folks the teachings of Gandhi and the expansion of his faith tradition. And so he brought into the civil rights movement, because at the same time he was born, many Black folks were coming back from the war and starting to be discomforted in a militant way about all that was going on. But so activism was there, but what the movement didn't have was strategy and spirituality. And so I happened to be born when people were saying the ministers had to go to seminary, but it is not the kind that I would contend the seminarians understanding we have now, because what has not been captured in a lot of books right now is also there was great spirituality going on there. There was great what we would call, what you would call mysticism, and what we call spirituality. I happen, by the blessings of God, to know some folks like Gardner Taylor, Prathia Hall, Weems, all those folks. And those folks, the center of their ministry was preaching and prayer. We forget that before every march, prayer meeting happened. We forget that singing was important. We forget that the social justice didn't only have a breadth, but it had a depth. And there were people who were turned away from marches. It's just like this is why John Lewis was so important, because before you went on a march, you actually had to go and be trained. And training was not technique, it was some technique, but it was a lot about spirituality. And if you were going to respond because you just weren't where you needed to be spiritually, they would tell you not to do it. And so the notion that, and then I wanted to end there and to say, so African-American spirituality is, yes, sometimes the caricature is about social justice and freedom, but the reality is about transformation and actually of not only a person, but people and communities. It's about a connection with God that mediates through the connection with humanity. Remember, it was not just the cross, it's not just a Nicene Creed and church councils. It actually was Moses, right? And the liberation story. And when you put those two together, then you have the last thing I would be remorse is to say worship is also incredibly important. And I won't even go to that tonight, but look at the debate of Herskovitz and Frazier, because worship in the Black church has a lot of Africanisms, because our traditions continue on today. And a lot of times people do things in worship, they do things and whatever, and folks go, I don't understand that. And it's like, well, you won't understand it if you're from a perspective of trying to interpret it rather than be in it. And again, Ethiopian Coptic Church, the definition is when they're worshiping, if you look at the theology, they believe they worship in the presence of heaven. They are in heaven when they worship. This is just simply resonates from that. So when you see the ecstatic praise, when you see the worship, which I do think sometimes some traditions now mimic with, especially in the charismatic tradition sometimes, and I'm not against charismatic is cool, but it sometimes is a caricature of deep worship rather than being deep worship, right? And so I think, so the hallmarks are really, the idea of transformation and social justice as transformation, right? The idea of finding out that we have a static or Africanistic worship also, and then finally the reality of being inclusive, and we've not always been inclusive, because I think in the month that we celebrate Pride and Pulse, one of the things that has had to happen real recently, and that's the great thing about a church that is open. Eventually, we do get around to being open. And at the time, I would say the Black church always had, I think probably all churches had, LGBTQI people. And I, especially in the arts part of it. And so it's been probably within my lifetime that ultimately has become, for a lot of churches, not the majority still, but for a lot of churches, an openness, but they wouldn't call it an openness. They'll just call it, church. It's just church is what we should have been doing. It's what we could be doing. It's what it is. And when you just listen to all I've just said about spirituality, it makes sense, because one of my predecessors at St. Andrew, he was always talking about numerology, right? The idea of the spirit, right? And so that is the fundamental reality. We really lean in on the idea of the spirit. And we really lean in on the idea of things being free in the context of God still revealing God's self right now in ways that are astonishing. We do not understand God, thank God. And so I want to stop right there in 12 minutes. I hope I haven't rambled, but I just wanted to try to get the big points in.
Thank you. That was a lot of information and a lot of history too, which is I very much appreciate. If you have any questions, if you are here in person, don't forget to raise your hand. And if you are on Zoom, type them in and we will get to as many as possible. I think I just want to start with a good friend I grew up with and I'm still friends with, mainly via Facebook because she doesn't live nearby, but she's Black and she was adopted into a white family as a young child and was raised in the Christian faith, but has really come out against it, I think, because of the way it was used to promote slavery. So I was just curious how, what would your response be to someone like that?
Well, our first response is not to try to convince them anything. Right. So I may not even want to respond, but since you asked that way, so I just want to, that when someone, I think it is a lack of the generosity and broadness of God when someone is different from you, for you to say, let me tell you what you should be, right? And so I want to say that. However, I will say then in my encounter with people who have invited me into that conversation, there's a couple things. First of all, if Black church religion was only what happened in America, that becomes interesting. That's why I always remind people that Christianity did not begin with missionaries to Black people, right? It actually is a spirituality. And so when one encounters the God in a context, the cultural context of African-American church, it's very different than in white churches, right? Because of that reality. Africanisms are there, the understanding of transformative, the cross being important, but the cross not being, I think sometimes the cross becomes a chain instead of becoming a place that is a launching pad for inquiry. So all of this, first of all, is the history reality. The second of all is the absolute idea of religion being ultimately, of all religious faiths, can be manipulated. And so if that's what you're looking for religion, absolutely. But that's not my conversation. My conversation is faith in God. And so, again, because I want to say, I may not respond to that at all, but if someone invites me into the conversation, I would say, okay, so are you interested in exploring what it means to know God? So if people are like, I don't believe there's a God, and it's because of the way white people have used religion, and you're like, good, because I don't really care. Religion is not where I'm at. When, as a pastor, I said to someone today, I am a mentor and a helper of your journey, and I'm not proprietary. And someone was thinking about, should I be in this church or not? I'm like, okay. And he's like, well, but I thought you should come, and aren't you going to make? No, that's not me, right? That's not the God I serve, right? That's not the God I love. That's not the God who loves me. God is God all by God's self, and God is not interested in fulfilling our dreams. God is interested in blowing our imagination. And so that's the God that we do. And so I don't know if that wouldn't be helpful, but I don't know what being helpful would be, right? I don't know if there's a goal to it. Probably I would resistant to it. But if there's an inquiry, I'd enjoy having that conversation. But a lot of it does come from the way in which Christians in America have located, they arrogantly said, we gave Christianity to Africans, and it is an arrogance that is historically wrong.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I love the part about not being proprietary. Yeah,
I do. And nobody wants to own. I mean, no community should own, right?
No.
And people wander in and out of community, and that the wandering Aramarians themselves are community. The people who wander from, they are a community too that we need to listen to. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
You somewhat touched on this, but I'm thinking with all the call and response that goes on in the church that is so invigorating, does that extend to the horizontal arising of the numinous, or is it? Do you have new programs that come from the ideas of the congregation as much as from the top down.
Sure. In fact, so one of the things I haven't talked about, I mean, if we were doing a course, I would talk about what incarnation is central. The notion that, I mean, and again, so you got to, I'm going to speak out of my tradition. What is the most fascinating thing to me about Christ and Christianity is there's something so fascinating about humanity that God says, I got to get with that. You know what I'm saying? and then there's something so powerful about the presence of God that is in all of us. So incarnation happens in community, not just in a person. That means the ideas in spirituality. That means the creativity and response to people. So there aren't, in fact, people we serve, right? There are important people that we collaborate with. Sometimes we collaborate them because they happen to be unhoused. So if I do something for an unhoused person, I'm not, we're serving each other. And if you've ever worked with any of those communities, you realize there is a call, you call it a response. There is that sense of going back and forth. At St. Andrews, we have a resident genius, Yaka Kwai, who's built this ministry up. We're now doing a ministry for the unhoused folks or the back path. We've got ministries up the yazoo there, only because they represent the community there, right? I believe, and I'm going to say that, I believe that a church is not a church unless it is in conversation with the community around it. And it is not certainly a vital church if you don't have if you aren't listening to the needs of the people. And there's a conservative evangelical, but a great guy, Perkins, who said it's the felt needs. And it's not the studied needs, okay? It's not the needs that come from academia. It's the felt needs, right? And so you might say, well, statistically, this is not a big need. If it's the felt needs of the people that are there, that's what you minister to. And so that is within, again, because it comes from, so call and response as worship, but call and response as the fundamentals of ministry is important. I don't believe that you can have the church, and I get in trouble with this, right? That ministry and our sense of call is not because we have credentials. It is not even because, and even when a congregation through a process calls you, you are not their pastor until that congregation recognizes in you a love for them and they have a love for you and a love for the folks around them. Then you're called. So that is, I think, the burden. And I remember I said earlier that King had to fulfill all the things for being a Black pastor. That's what I meant, right? The fact that he was smart, frankly, and we all love that. But had he not been able to do that, he's completely ineffective. Completely ineffective. But the people in this community saw, hey, he loved us, he cared for us, and he listened to us and what we were doing. Because that you will have to, and I want to stop answering my too long answer. You will have to ask people to do something that's uncomfortable. And if you ask them, and they will never do that because it's right. They will only do it because they feel like it's right, and they will do it because they feel like it's right because they trust you, and so that's why it's important to have that connection.
Questions?
Pastor Floyd, while you're very much talking about pastoral ministry, one question online. Please tell us a bit about your congregation, St. Andrews, and your ministry there.
Good. That's someone from St. Andrew, I'm sure. No. Thank you. It was not a plant, but it should have been one. Real quick, St. Andrew Presbyterian Church, I have the great honor of serving with an amazing group of people, and in the tradition of amazing, just pastors, and I appreciate that. So St. Andrew, real quickly, is about over 40 years old. It was born, The church was born with a desire and a hope and the message and mission of reconciliation. And it was the coming together of other communities. And people don't know that the first pastor was white and a predominantly Black church, and the civil rights movement brought it together. It has always been involved in almost all of the great movements of that city in terms of housing, in terms of social justice. Angela Davis was a part of the congregation there. Right now, we have Melba Beals, who is there right now, who is one of the Little Rock Nine. And we have several people that are involved. So right now we have come to the table, which some of you may have heard of. If you haven't, you should. And it is an incredible program that tries to bring in, I won't go into it because I could talk about that all day. Scott knows that. But it's the next thing to say, that we realize that we're in a broken community. And so that whole program is about trying to bring people to the community, to sit at the table, to be able to have connections with one another, well within the DNA of the church. I always talk about the DNA of St. Andrew. The DNA of St. Andrew is incarnational. The DNA of St. Andrew is transformational. And the DNA of St. Andrews is good trouble, right? And so we will always be probably not people in the board of supervisors will not like us. Folks in the community will find us both exciting and infuriating, because we will challenge inside and outside. And hopefully the people will find us to be loving, and we'll do anything we can to make sure that the lives of people in Marin City will be changed. And so we have AA meetings, we have, which of course, I think many people in your networks, we have, as I said, come to the table. We have a whole lot of food in ministries we're doing, environmentalism. We just partnered to do something in technology with kids. We have the center. There's a lot of stuff. Write to church and we'll give you a pamphlet. But it comes from that. You asked that question about incarnation. It comes from that. That is the essence of the church, is that incarnational. If you join St. Andrew, we hope that you have a spiritual awakening to be the place that God wants you to be. But we also will hopefully mentor you, saying you cannot have that spiritual awakening without having community and without having the ability to try and redress injustice or inequality. That's not something you might want to be in part of. That's a part of your spiritual journey, and it will change you. And it'd be the powerful things you do. That's the Jesus. If you want to hear more about that, read Howard Thurman's Disinherited. Jesus is Disinherited. Or you can read James Cone's Cross and the Lynching Tree. Great book, in which he takes on churches for not taking on the battle of racism in America as a central tenet of what it's called to do. I don't, Jesus didn't just leave a church for worship purposes. Okay, it's for the purpose of that. So again, I have to say it's engaged mysticism. It's important. It's engaged mysticism. So again, I'm not going to dominate, but I will do a commercial for St. Andrew anytime. We're at 11 o'clock Sunday mornings. Come on down.
Could you talk a little bit, Pastor Floyd, about womanist theology?
As much as I can. I humbly say that I will only say it is my perspective, and it's probably not well developed, because you really want a woman to talk about womanist theology. So I want to be really honest about that. However, Prathia Hall-Wynn was one of my mentors, and Renita, Weems and I were friends, so I kind of know that a little bit. Basically, feminist theology, feminism again, I was born at a particular time where people were beginning to think about, and I just happened to be around some really amazing people, were beginning to think about what it is for women to be empowered in the church and in religion and in faith. And I'm going to say this, and Prathia was pretty not happy about the one part of the movement that happened with Martin Luther King, that it was sexist. That she told me, look, we made a deal with the guys to say, we'll let you do first, and then we will come later, and they never got there, right? If you'll look at the speech on the, if you look at the speech at the Lincoln Memorial, there's only one woman that spoke that day, and she didn't speak. It was Mahalia Jackson, and the part of the speech that everyone remembers, it was what Prathia, he got from Prathia Hall Wynne, I have a dream. He is now attributed, it came from Prathia Hall Wynne that she said in Albany, Georgia, which the guys were always stealing for the living, which is, which is fine. So in some sense, they didn't have their own voice. And then also, so Black women or women began to say, we need our own voice. They also were feeling, I think, resistance from white feminist women who tend to have a class bias to some degree, right? And that is not the same that these women had experienced. And so they began to create their own voice, hear their own voice and what it is to be there. And at the time, again, I was born in a very particular thing. There's a book called Troubling Biblical Waters, which no one remembers now, but that's the first person that says you can take the text and those texts have clarity on something other, because the way we used to teach Bible, right? First of all, there are no white people in the Bible. They're all people of color. Okay. But we never say that, right? We teach the whole Bible as if it's white. They're Semitic, they're Black, they're whatever. There are no white people in the Bible, right? But hear how people teach it. So this guy finally came, his last name was King. He came in and he said, what you need to do is start looking at the text and reading them honestly. And once you start doing that, the perspective of women and like what I just did earlier, which reminded you, look at Acts, right? There are trans people in the Bible. We would never have said it, but now that's not imposed in the scripture, that arises from the scripture. And so women's voices began to say we need the political, the social, the psychological understanding of women and in the Bible and in the faith, and the needs and the imagination become a part, and without it, we are not whole. And particularly Black women also. And so the same thing is happening, I think, with the queer community right now, as they're finding their voices also in the same way at this point. So again, I didn't want to get into particulars because I wanted you to listen to a womanist, but that's the broad strokes. And it's the unfinished business of the civil rights movement, right? And it is, Prathia tells me the story that on the Pettus Bridge, one of the most disappointing things, and again, I could say this now, is King started that march, but he didn't get arrested. That he wasn't on the bridge when they took him away. And the reason everybody loved John Lewis is one of the few men that were actually there. Most of the other people that got in jail that day were women and children. And it always ended up being, and so, and then suddenly their stories weren't the ones that were told. And so I think right now you're seeing some powerful women right now, Emily Townsend, you're hearing some powerful women who are speaking their story and their truth. I also have to remind you that the story, when I was in seminary, they were just uncovering Joanna Lee, who is one of the first women. She was a preacher, enslaved right out of slavery. And my mother is a minister. When they didn't, and I have to say, my wife is a minister. I'm not the best preacher in my house or in my family. They are, and so the idea that womenists were always in every church, they kind of carry everything, but Black women, and again, I was born at a particular time. They didn't ask for permission to be noticed. They just began when they got free. They said, we noticed. And remember, in the Pentecostal tradition, which is where my mother's from, long since have accepted women because of the spiritualist nature of the tradition. So that just never seemed odd to me. It just never seemed odd to me because in that church, that was a major part of it. Although officially it wasn't. The reality is it did. And then there's one last thing in terms of the pastors. I think there's, all these denominations that fight about whether it be women preachers or whatever. Most of my mother's friends who got accepted as pastors is that when the guys told them they couldn't pastor, they just went and started their own church. And then when it got to be bigger than anybody else's church, everybody accepted them. I mean, fine, forget it. I mean, AME, that's how it happened a lot with John Bryant. So there is a way to empower your own voice and say, again, it's not about religion. It's really about God. If God is calling me, I really don't have time for you. I'll just move on forward. And so I think right now that voice is emerging in theology, but it has always been there in the church.
Thank you.
Can you say the name again of the person who wrote the book? You mentioned Howard Thurman.
Cain Hope Felder's Troubling Biblical Order. Howard Thurman is Disinherited. I think there's the Jesus and the Disinherited. Who else did I mention?
Cone.
James Cone, yes. The cross and the lynching tree. James Cone.
Okay.
Yeah, James Cone. Yeah, that's the most recent one. He died, I think, about 4 years ago. Yeah, 4 years ago. Yeah. I'm trying to remember how it was. And a very readable text that's old, but is still, I was there when she wrote it, is what is Renita Weems? Just look her up, Renita Weems. She has a biblical meditations that are pretty amazing and awesome.
Say your name very clearly.
Renita Weems, Weems. Okay. That's a real readable text that gives you a sense of what the voice of women and how womanist looks at text and plays around. And if you ever want to go to the Bay Area and you're around on a Sunday, go with the Oakland and go to Yvette Funder's City of Refuge Church. Yeah. Not to mention, there's a dean at Stanford who's pretty wonderful too, and she's associate dean of the chapel there. And I'm going to mess up her name, which is why I'm not going to say it. So if you're online, I'm sorry. But I did send them over to you, so you have to hear that. Shakira, is Dr. Shakira there? I don't know. Anyway, we'll see. Yes.
Do you have time for any more questions?
Yeah. No, please.
I'm just curious about, I've been attending the community church in Thurman for many, I grew up in the church, so.
Yeah, amazing church. One of my favorite churches. Was one of my favorite pastors.
We're looking at a question that I'm thinking probably about other churches are, which is about the young people. How do we offer something to the youth that will make them want to come? And I'm wondering, from your point of view, in your community, are you?
Yeah, we're actually doing, we also have the same, everybody does, right? We've been doing other things, and now I think we're turning our face towards, when we say young people, it's a broad spectrum, right? Okay, so, that's the other thing. So we do have some folks in the 30 to 40 range who are coming in. They think of themselves as young. They're young. They have your own kind of young. Okay. However, I think what you're thinking of is the 20-year-olds and younger, and high school and middle schoolers, and then kids.
Who are roaring around town with their electric bicycles.
This is again, I apologize because it's going to sound self-promoting, but trust me, the only reason I tell you this book is because I am the smallest voice in the book. There's something called the Digital Church. If you go get that book, I'm the oldest guy writing in that book. Okay, I am the old man. But that book has some insights from a whole bunch of folks who were on the progressive authors who are talking about the idea that we have to do business with how we speak to that generation, but also how we access that generation, which is one of the reasons we went into partnership with Marin County Library and did the lab, right? Because by the way, folks, church, religious community, well, I love the way we do this, right? We come in and say, why don't they see what we have to offer? Why are we so great? Let's be very clear. Nobody has to come to our churches. People come to our churches when it meets their needs, not when they meet your needs, right? So one of the things is to figure out what is it that they need, right? How is it the questions that they have? So I think first of all, just reversing the question. Now, truth in advertising, I also work once or twice a week for Stanford United Campus Ministries. I go to Stanford and on that campus. And one of the projects we're doing right now that is taking off, we're trying to look at how we do campus ministry, because campus ministry is like, oh, students go off to college and they have a thing, and then they hopefully will come back to the church. Well, we said, what happens if we actually consider them in the church right now and have something to say to the church while they're in college, right? And one of the questions that came up was the right now LGBTQI community is very are being attacked in a lot of ways, and they also are not having generational conversations, right? And so people from those campuses begin to talk to us because we expanded the reach to really not just Stanford, and so we started doing something called intergenerational conversations. And so I think we'll launch next fall. We'll put it on site because now we're going to have churches to say, this is how you do that. Because I'll tell you what happened by having those conversations, right? First of all, they became incredibly multicultural, right? Secondarily, they also became really, by the way, I can't be in those conversations. I can set them up, get them going, and they kick me out of the room. But I read the transcripts. But that was an idea of looking at a community, saying, what is it that we can do or you can do, and watching that happen. I think we need to find those points to say, what is it you need, right? And how can we serve you? Now, with your pastor, I've had some conversations because I'm going to meddle a little bit. Tam High really needs folks right now with what's going on there. And so hopefully we'll figure out as a faith community how to engage with them also. Tam High School.
What is Tam High?
Well, Tam High, again, without going through this, had a lot of racial incidents this year. And I think it bespeaks of some brokenness in the community, some disconnectedness. And I think that's what we do well. And so we figure out how to offer ourselves to that. Those kind of things. I mean, again, incarnational. What is it not? How do we get them to come? But what is it that we need, that they need, right? And then how can we connect to them? I just have a shout out. We've got some amazing teenagers who are the most attentive people in the church preaching wise. I mean, they're on the cameras. I mean, they're doing the cameras and stuff like that. And those they're 14, 15, 16-year-olds, and they are the only ones that actually listen to the sermon. I'm convinced. No, I'm just kidding. They really are. So it isn't that they're not interested. It's just that we've got to make sure that we say, what is it that you need, and connect to it. The other thing, and I've spent years working in that age, right? So I say the other thing is not being afraid to look at young people and give them the full palette of emotions. Don't say, oh, they're kids, right? They're human beings that have their questions are not only valid, but interesting and important, and cannot be seen in the light of criticism, and cannot be seen in the light of only teaching them. It's got to be a dialogue where I've learned every time I talk to a student at Stanford, I learn some stuff from them. And I don't mean technologically, I mean, I sometimes they'll say something and I go, I have no idea. We're going to be controversial. I don't understand Tinder. I don't understand Grindr. But that's a dating life, there. I don't understand not asking someone out that's sitting next to you, but then going back to the dorm and then getting on an app and then asking them out. I'm like, they're right there. Okay. I don't get that, right? And I'm learning something about, community and stuff like that. So I think, but I think if we can just get the dialogue to, I want to learn something from you, and authenticity is the most important thing you can do in ministry. And right now, I don't think churches are authentic about saying to young people, I don't just want to serve you and get you to believe like I do or give you our values, but that's something we need from you, because clearly we don't understand. Because there's an old gospel hymn, and it's one that's the hardest thing. It says, to serve this present age, my calling to fulfill. So it doesn't matter what we did 30 years ago. It doesn't even matter what we did 15 years ago. Our call is to serve this present age. And if that's so, there's some things I don't know, and I got to figure out how to do it. So I don't know, that's helpful.
Thank you.
Kathy offered that it is Renita Weems' book, Just a Sister
Thank you.
Away.
Just a Sister Away. I could not think of that name. Just a Sister Away. Yeah, that's the name of Renita Weems' book. Womanist Theology. It's the first thing I would read because it's easy, it's accessible, and the stories. Yeah.
I think I'm going to have to listen to this and create a book reading list for everyone and send it out when we send the.
I'm sorry, that's just the way my mind thinks.
No, that's
right?
perfect. That's perfect.
Yeah. And in terms of queer theology, I think Brandon Robertson is a young man who's 30 years old, and he's writing good stuff, and he's doing a PhD at Drew, and he's got a bunch of good things kind of brooding over how do you kind of think about queer theology too. So that's really important too.
Any questions online?
I think we've touched on most of them.
Okay.
I can certainly
Thank you.
offer some more.
I don't feel like I've done a good job answering your question. I'm sorry. I'm still thinking. What to be thinking about that?
I got a hearing aid like about 6 months ago, and I forgot to bring it up because usually there are microphones, but I'm not catching your every word.
Okay. I'll speak up. I mean, if you want me to do that, I'll do that.
Thing of dropping
yeah. Right. Oh yeah. Okay. I will speak up. Thank you.
No, it's not about volume. It's about
my register.
Because you know what you're saying, but I don't know what those last two words are that you.
Okay.
So I wish I think it would have helped if I'd done my part.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have to listen to it again.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That'd be interesting to see if I could fill in those extra words. But thank you.
What would be your invitation for the larger Christian church in America at this moment in time?
I think you need to ask Barbara and other people that. Okay. I mean, I'll give you mine, but I'm not, I think it's not the larger Christian church. I mean, the last paper we wrote was during the pandemic, and it taught us a lot. And good people from Marin City and Marin County was a part of that writing team. And one of the things, and now we have another writing team is doing something else. The one thing we learned that I really didn't understand about is collaboration. I don't think that we know how to work with one another. We are too, we asked for people to have a purity of belief before we have a clarity of relationship. And so, I think I would hope, one, that we who are faithful, and I don't want to go in shorthand with a good colleague of mine, I think the leading minister in Marin City, in my opinion, is Leggett, Pastor Leggett, right? And Pastor Leggett and I had the great honor of having 33 of the faith leaders from Marin County come over and spend a day with us because we were asking these questions. And I think the one time that we got upset, both of us, was when, shall we name nameless, some of those ministers said, well, what can we do? And I think that's where the ethnicity kicked in, because they were talking about, well, we're in Marin County and people don't really care about faith and what can, and we both went, what the heck are you doing? That's where we start. I mean, and especially if you're African American, you know, we always start from what looks impossible, right? That is, and so we don't want to even understand how that's even a part of the equation of what I might not do, right? So the question is like, it starts with the impossible, then it becomes improbable, and then ultimately is inevitable. That's how ministry goes, right? And so I would hope for the people of faith that, first of all, we value whatever journey we're in enough to say that we didn't experience that journey just for self-enlightenment, but for so that we can increase the light of the world. Secondarily, I would hope that we say, as for people of faith, that we also understand that part of increasing that light is pushing the boundaries of how people think about each other and the problems, right? Because what happens is when you're in your own silos, it's not what you see that's the problem, it's what you don't see. And that's why faith and light and different light helps you. Because there are a lot of folks who don't see class, right? They think everything is race. Some folks that we know very well. There are other people who think they only see race, they don't see class. There are other people who don't see gender. So the more light that gets in the room, the more we begin to see what's going on. And in some of the silos of the most regressive, almost Nazism, reality of America is because it's just a dark place and it's a pinpoint light. And they don't, and so it's not the problem that those people are not like us. It's that if that's all they see, they are us, right? And so the idea of faith is to keep increasing the light of people and the love of people. And the greatest amplifier of light is love, right? And so the reality is, and that's relationship. Right. So what I hope for America, what I hope for faith communities, that we become bold and assured, that we understand that our light is transformative, not just personal enlightenment, and that finally that we understand that our amplifier is love, which is how we connect with one another, being with one another, and lovingly not being upset when we encounter someone who does, on the first thing, don't accept it. Every committee that works with me, they know this and they laugh at me. In fact, I just heard someone tell me they didn't believe I said that. I always say to people, like, how do you know this is going to work? I'm like, because we're irresistible. It is, I mean, I actually do believe that that love and grace and it's irresistible. It's just that sometimes we give up before it works, right? So it's not inevitable. That's not what I'm saying. It's irresistible. And so that one of my favorite quotes that Jesus has said is that we're the light of the world, not in any affirmation of you're the only light, but in a suggestion that there is a light in you, right? And you've got to believe in that light, and you've got to let it shine and understand that it is there, not just so that you would see better, but as the world itself would see better. And then in somebody else's light, they would see, which is why I believe in interfaith dialogue and conversations, right? It brings new lights into the room, new spectrums into the room. I cannot tell you how many times in a conversation, one of the reasons the Ethiopian Coptic Church is so important to me, and a lot of people at Princeton will believe this, is at the time, again, I was born in a very particular time. My upstairs, the person who lived over me is a patriarch, now the patriarch, the Pope of the Ethiopian Coptic Church. At the time, he was in exile, and he would come down and talk to me, and I was like, I had no idea. And that began to actually, and we were talking about the Holy Spirit and things like that. Again, his light is the thing that helped me see a broader, and also helped me understand myself better. So I know that mostly it's people of faith who are looking at this, but if you wandered into the room accidentally as non-person of faith, we don't want to convert you. We actually need your light too. And if conversion happens, it's because it was the path that you chose, not the path that we gave you.
That's the time.
I've gone on too long. It's a black preacher. You know, I keep going.
You have not gone on too long. I think everybody has really enjoyed hearing from you, and I know I have. So thank you for joining us. And thank you all for joining us. And next month we have Dr. Erica Baines from the Sikh Faith Tradition. So please come the third Wednesday of the month. But thank you for tonight. And that's it.
Thank you. God bless.